hello everyone and good afternoon. We have a war here in Europe, and this has an impact to every one of us. And certainly it also has an impact to our today's topic, which is securing the critical infrastructure. We would like to bring this topic together with PCI DSS, and then we are ready for our today's topic, how PCI DSS can help you secure your critical infrastructure. My name is Kristes, and I'm an executive board member at USD AG. We are a PCI-accredited QSA company since 2006. And I personally have around 18 years of experience in the field of PCI. I'm an active QSA and a critical infrastructure assessor as well. And today I have Vinzent with me, who's happy to introduce himself.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Vinzent Ratermann, and I'm also from the USD, also a QSA, performing as well critical infrastructure assessments, most likely in the payment card industry, but we will cover that topic later on.
Great. Let's good, great. Let's see our today's agenda. So we have brought to you some central questions for today that we would like to answer. First of all, we'd like to discuss how is critical infrastructure protected within the European Union. Here we will talk about the already mentioned Directive on Security of Network and Information Systems, called NIS Directive, version 1 and 2 here in Europe. And we will talk about the German implementation of this directive, which is called IT Security Act in Germany, and we will talk about that. Next question that we would like to discuss with you or provide you with answers is, what challenges are we facing today? We will introduce you here to the concept of so-called security baselines, which is quite important in the area of critical infrastructure protection. And we will, of course, also talk about the topic scoping, where you can imagine that there are substantial differences between, for example, scope definitions between PCI DSS, that you all know, and critical infrastructure assessments. But there are overlaps as well. Next question is, how can PCI DSS support you in that area? We will show you in an example what are the differences between so-called sector-specific security standard and PCI DSS. Last but not least, we have brought to you today a very interesting case study coming from one of our clients, Worldline, and Vinzent will even go further into the details here and show you a real example from last year where we have performed the critical infrastructure assessment with Worldline together with PCI DSS. So back to the topic. Why do we think that critical infrastructure protection is vital for all of you here in the room? First of all, maybe for those of you that are not so familiar with the topic, critical infrastructures are entities of importance for the state community, whose failure would result in lasting supply bottlenecks, significant disruptions to public safety, or other dramatic consequences. So that means in the end that all kinds of services that are existing have to be protected, and they are under attack more than ever. Let's take an example. 2 weeks ago in Germany, we had sabotage attacks on the German railway system in Germany at our home, where 2 optic fiber cables were cut, and the whole rail traffic was interrupted for several hours in the northern part of Germany. You can see only by cutting 2 cables, it was possible in a sabotage act to bring the whole railway and stop the whole railway traffic inside of northern parts of Germany. And of course, you definitely have heard about the undersea explosions at the Nord Stream gas pipelines, which of course was a very critical topic as well in the last weeks. So large parts of the protection of critical infrastructures are, of course, digital threats. So here we come into play. So basically, all critical infrastructure components are affected. And now Vinzent will go a bit more into the details and explain to you a bit more the regulatory background.
Yes, so let's do it the other way around. So how do we want to protect our critical infrastructures? And there are two levels of protections in the European Union. So the first level is the EU NIS2 directive. It's a directive from the European Parliament and applies directly to all of the member states. When I say directly, this means that every member state at its own must implement the requirements of the NIS2 to a local law. And in Germany, it's the IT Security Act, or in German, the IT Sicherheitsgesetz. And there are several other laws in all other different member states of the European Union. We have another example, it's the Italian one. I'm not sure how to spell it directly, so I leave it to you. But as well, there are a lot of different other laws which simply define how to protect the critical infrastructures. But when we talk about critical infrastructures, it's really interesting to think about what are the critical infrastructures to us as a people who are living in a country. And for that reason, here we have the 9 different fields or sectors applicable to Germany. So we have, for example, the water, which is really critical. So if you do not have any water anymore, it's really critical for at least me. Also the nutrition, and of course the finance and insurance industry. But also some topics that are covered by other sectors are critical, or PCI can apply also to other sectors which are not directly in the finance industry. For example, the IT and telecom sector, there's also a content management or content delivery network, which is critical for the websites, for the different websites, but is not directly in the finance sector. But of course, as we are here in the PCI sector and in the PCI environment, we will focus on the finance and insurance company or sector. And for that, I will hand over to Christopher again to give a little bit more insight.
Okay, first of all, I already mentioned the concept of a so-called security baseline, which is very important in the area of critical infrastructure. So here you can see an excerpt of the German regulation, so the German local implementation of the European legislation, and you can directly see that, for example, compared to a standard that you all know, probably PCI DSS, there are no clear definitions what you have to do in protecting your critical infrastructure. So the statement here only says that you must implement adequate organizational and technical measures to reduce the possibility of incidents. So it's a very generic statement. Yeah? So you don't have a concrete list of requirements or not even a direct link to a reference or to PCI DSS or any other security standard. So in the end, that means the baseline in this context has to be defined by the operator of the critical infrastructure service, so in the end, the company that is providing the service, or an according association. But I will talk about that in a few seconds a bit more. So here it comes into play that you have different possibilities for creating such a security baseline. And the first option is that you create or use a so-called sector-specific security standard. That's a context. That's a concept where you can where different groups are coming together, experts, so to say, from one sector, and then define per sector a so-called sector-specific security standard. So an own security standard that can be based on any other standard, for example, also on PCI DSS. And the second option is you use a well-known standard, so quite often 27001 is used as a baseline for critical infrastructure protection, but typically you are adding more requirements to the standard. You can imagine that when you're protecting, for example, I don't know, electricity companies, as an example, ISO 27001 is not sufficient alone, so you have to add so-called sector-specific requirements to the standard. And the third option is that you use a well-known standard on its own without adding any additional requirements here. But the third option is typically not so well used. You can imagine that normally you always have at least some sector-specific requirements that you have to add. So let's dig a bit deeper into an example, and this example that we took here for understanding it better on your side is the sector finance and assurance, and there we have in Germany an electronic cash network operator sector-specific standard. So you use the sector-specific standard and apply it to your critical infrastructure scope. So in this case, electronic cash network operators, these are companies that receive card data from point-of-sale terminals and that are processing this kind of data. And as you can see here in this example, probably PCI DSS already applies in that environment. So here you already have a connection to that. So, when we have a look now in a few seconds on the next slide, you will see that the sector-specific standard specifically was even built on PCI DSS. And you can see that here. So here we made a comparison between this sector-specific security standard and PCI DSS. In this case, it was 3.2.1. So not 4.0 yet, but you can directly see that there's a huge overlap between both standards. So the differences are more or less in the area where it comes or where it is about availability. As you can see in the column Business Continuity Management, BCM, which is of course not a very strong topic in PCI DSS. So here you have to add additional sector-specific requirements. And the same, for example, for physical security. So here there were requirements added to the sector-specific standard, but in general, you can see that the overlap is quite high. So PCI DSS was used here as a baseline for creating the sector-specific standard and for protecting your critical infrastructure. And now Vinzent will even go a bit more into detail and show us the case study that we have prepared.
Yes, so we have seen that there is a pretty much overlap between PCI DSS and the critical infrastructure assessment, or it can at least be a huge overlap between those cases. And one of those cases that we have faced in the Worldline assessment for the Worldline Germany GmbH, I want to show you right now. So in the end, as most of the assessments, there are 4 different phases, or 3 to 4 different phases. First of all, the scoping phase, which is really critical when it comes to combine 2 different assessments. Then there's the PCI DSS assessment on the first time. You have to do that. Then the critical infrastructure assessment, and then the reporting phase for both of them. So let's talk a little bit more in detail of the different steps or the different phases. So first of all, the scoping phase is a really crucial phase. So when it comes to the PCI DSS scopes, most of the organizations tend or try to have a smallest scope as possible. So you use different techniques how to decrease the scope in the end of the day. For example, you can use tokenizations, you can use hashing to some extent, and then some critical systems that might be critical for the overall critical service are not yet in the PCI DSS assessment. So you have to really look at that, and here you have a little bit of a clash. So on the one hand, you want to use PCI DSS as a baseline for your critical infrastructure assessment. On the other hand, you try to keep the PCI DSS scope as much as possible. So when we see that, we see also there are a lot of common systems and a lot of common concepts, which also different between, for example, the ISO 20001. So in the ISO scope, you might only have the critical services when it comes to, for example, the production servers. Not the management servers are not in scope, only the production servers. And here comes PCI DSS into place. There are also the connected to systems in scope already, and also security impacting systems, which is quite the same for the critical infrastructure assessment. When it comes to the testing and to the actual assessment, we have done it in the way that we have first of all performed the PCI DSS testing, and then on a second step perform the additional requirements first to the PCI DSS scope, as we have already seen, and then perform the PCI DSS testing together with the critical infrastructure assessment on all other systems that are not part of the PCI DSS scope. So that's the huge part of the assessment in the end. There are also some difference between between both standards, between both executions. So as Christopher already said, the critical infrastructure assessment is most likely on the availability. So the goal of the critical assessment is just to have the critical service running. It's not that much of importance that you might lose some credit card data, which is in the case for the PCI DSS, but it's just important to keep the service running. So the focus is on the availability. However, when we combine two assessments, we can leverage from each other. So for example, the key management are important to the critical infrastructure as well as to the PCI DSS assessment. And also the data security or the physical security on the data center are also important for both of the assessments. Then the last phase is about the writing of reports. So on the one hand, you all know them. You have the report on compliance and the attestation of compliance for your PCI DSS assessment. And on the other hand, you have an assessment report. And here is also a huge difference between PCI and the critical infrastructure assessment. So you have here a list of non-compliances, which is an absolutely not a valid approach for the PCI DSS assessment. So here again, if you be compliant with the PCI DSS, you tend to have less non-compliances, which we have to report to the German law or to the other regulatory body. So that's a key feature. When you stay PCI DSS compliant, you generally have less non-compliances. In the end, I just give you a short introduction about how to combine PCI DSS and critical infrastructure assessments. And now for the key takeaways, I will hand over to Christopher again.
Great. So let's talk a bit about the key takeaways that we are seeing based on what we did in this area. First of all, most important is that I hope you could see that based on the recent attacks and what is happening out there, we really think that securing your critical infrastructure and also now from a payment perspective, securing your payment gateways and point of interaction devices and all these kind of things will be one of the major IT security topics for the next years. So the attacks are coming, and we clearly think that it is not enough to focus on the confidentiality of your card data. We really think you have to focus more on the availability and integrity of your systems, because they will be under attack. Second, you have seen that PCI DSS has a huge overlap with sector-specific security standards. So PCI DSS is really a great security baseline because it is concrete, and when you think especially, for example, about the enhancements that were made in PCI DSS version 4, looking at, for example, the customized approach, you can see that the new version provides more possibilities for using PCI DSS as a baseline, also for your critical infrastructure assessment and as a control catalog. So it's more easy than ever to take DSS version 4 to enhance the existing PCI DSS control set with additional critical infrastructure controls to cover both topics in one large control catalog. And the last topic is really very important from our point of view, because I hope we could show you a bit more into detail that you should not only use PCI DSS for your credit card environment. So especially when you begin with DSS version 4, and for all of us, it's a more or less new beginning to analyze how to implement the new requirements. We strongly encourage you to using this from our point of view, best-in-class security standard also for securing your critical infrastructure. And that concludes our talk for today. So thanks for listening. It was a pleasure being here today. If you have any questions, Vinzent and I, we will be here today and tomorrow, the whole day. So just feel free to look out for us. We are very happy if you join us for further intensive discussions. And yeah, that's all from our side. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.